There comes a day in life when the house is no longer noisy, no children running around, no urgent calls, no responsibilities knocking at the door. And suddenly, the silence is so loud that you start hearing yourself for the first time. And in that silence, one question quietly rises. If I am no longer needed the way I used to be, then what am I still here for? Lesson 1: Purpose is not a job title. There is a gentle truth that life slowly teaches us when we step into retirement, that our identity is never truly limited to what we did for a living. For decades, we introduce ourselves by our profession, and we feel complete because our job gives structure to our days and recognition to our existence. But when the job stops, we do not lose only work, we also lose the mirror through which we used to see ourselves. I remember a story of a retired school principal who, after 40 years of service, suddenly found himself waking up without urgency. The mornings were no longer calling him, the bell no longer needed his presence, and the corridors he once walked with authority became silent memories. He told me once that silence can feel peaceful for a while, but if it stays too long, it starts asking questions you are not ready to answer. In that space, he realized that the problem was not retirement, but the absence of a renewed sense of purpose. Because purpose was never meant to retire with the job, it was meant to evolve with the person. And when he began volunteering at a small community center, teaching children basic reading skills, something inside him awakened again. He said it was not about the children alone, but about feeling needed in a world that he had quietly stepped away from. That is when he understood that purpose is not something written on a nameplate, but something alive in service. It is not defined by titles, but by the ability to contribute meaningfully to someone else's life. And once he tasted that form of contribution, he never again measured his worth by his old designation. He said retirement removed his job, but it also revealed his humanity in a deeper way. And perhaps that is the real lesson, that you are not your profession, you are your presence. So when the job disappears, what remains is not emptiness, but the opportunity to rediscover who you are beyond it. That rediscovery often begins in small acts, like helping a neighbor guide a child or simply listening to someone who feels unheard. In those simple moments, life quietly tells you that your purpose was never lost. It was just waiting to be expressed differently. He discovered that even without a title, he could still be significant in the eyes of those he served. And that significance brought him a peace that achievement alone never had. It is in this understanding that we begin to see retirement not as an ending, but as a soft beginning. A beginning where identity is no longer borrowed from work, but built from wisdom, experience, and compassion. And when that shift happens, life feels less like a withdrawal and more like a deeper engagement with meaning itself. He often says now that the greatest discovery after retirement is not what you lost, but what you were always capable of becoming. And that realization turns silence into guidance and emptiness into invitation. So the first lesson is simple yet profound: your job is what you did, but your purpose is what you continue to become. And when you begin to live from that understanding, even the quietest days begin to feel meaningful again. You no longer chase identity, you begin to embody purpose in the smallest, most ordinary actions of your day. And slowly the question changes from what am I now to how can I serve with what I still have. That shift alone is enough to transform retirement from confusion into clarity. And clarity is the beginning of a second purpose that feels lighter, more honest, and deeply fulfilling. It is not about becoming someone new, but about remembering who you were when you were most alive in service. And that remembrance is what quietly guides you into your second chapter, where life is no longer measured by achievement, but by meaning shared, and where even a small act of kindness becomes a lifelong contribution. So do not see retirement as the end of your usefulness, but as the beginning of your deeper usefulness. Because purpose never retires, it only changes its form quietly. Lesson 2: Empty house, full heart. There is a moment in life after retirement when the house that once echoed with voices suddenly becomes quiet, and that silence can feel heavier than expected. For many people, this quietness is mistaken for loneliness, but in truth, it is an invitation to rediscover connection in new places. I once heard about a woman who, after her children moved abroad, began spending her days sitting near the window watching life pass slowly. At first, she felt abandoned by time itself, as though her purpose had been packed into suitcases and taken away. But one morning, she noticed a young girl struggling with homework in the neighborhood, and something inside her stirred. She walked over, gently offered help, and that simple act of teaching a child became the beginning of her second life. What she discovered was that purpose does not disappear when roles change, it only waits quietly to be expressed differently. And when she started helping others, she realized something profound, that giving is not about how much you have, but about how much presence you bring. In giving, she found herself again, not as someone who was needed only at home, but as someone who could touch many lives. She said the emptiness she once feared slowly turned into space where kindness could grow. And that space became her second home, a home not made of walls, but of meaningful connections. This is the hidden truth of empty houses. They are not truly empty, they are waiting to be filled with new forms of love. And love after retirement often takes the shape of service rather than possession. It is no longer about holding on, but about reaching out. I have seen retired individuals who felt forgotten transform completely when they began sharing their skills with those who had none. The change was not in their circumstances, but in their willingness to give without expecting anything in return. And slowly they stopped asking what is left for me and started asking who still needs me. That shift in question is where purpose quietly awakens again. And once awakened, it brings a sense of joy that no amount of rest alone can provide. It is a joy that comes from being useful in the lives of others. And usefulness in this stage of life is not about productivity but about compassion. So, the second lesson is that when your house becomes empty, your heart is not meant to become empty with it. It is meant to expand beyond walls, beyond family routines, and beyond personal comfort. And that expansion happens naturally when you begin to give your time, your attention, and your care to others. Because giving is not loss, it is multiplication of meaning. And those who give often find that they receive far more peace than they ever expected. So do not measure your worth by how much space you occupy in a house. Measure it by how much space you create in someone's life. And when you create space for others, you also create space within yourself. That inner space becomes a sanctuary of peace that no silence can disturb. And in that peace, you realize that the house was never empty after all. It was simply waiting for new forms of love to arrive. And those forms begin the moment you decide to serve again. So the second purpose is not found in doing more, but in giving more meaningfully. And even a small act done with love can fill an entire empty house with life. Because life after retirement is not about filling time, but about filling hearts. And when hearts are filled, the house no longer feels empty at all. It feels alive again through every act of kindness shared. That is how giving becomes the bridge between loneliness and fulfillment. So do not close your heart when your house becomes quiet. Open it wider, because that is where your second purpose begins. And it begins not with receiving but with giving. Giving without expectation, and with open presence, and with quiet love, and with patience, and with compassion, and with grace. That becomes enough, always enough, to begin again beautifully quietly. Lesson 3. Second purpose is smaller on the outside, bigger in the heart. There is a quiet realization that comes later in life when ambition softens and something more meaningful begins to call from within. It is not a loud calling but a gentle whisper that asks you to contribute rather than compete. Many people after retirement assume that their most valuable days are behind them. But life often has a different plan, one where value is not reduced but redefined. I remember an elderly man who once built a successful business and then sold it thinking his productive life was over. For a few years, he lived comfortably but quietly felt disconnected from something deeper inside himself. One day, he visited a local school and helped repair broken desks for children. That small act unexpectedly reignited a sense of usefulness he thought he had lost forever. He began returning every week, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to. And slowly he realized that purpose does not shrink with age, it expands with awareness. This is the hidden truth of second purpose. It is not about doing more, but about doing what matters more deeply. When distractions fall away, clarity begins to rise. And in that clarity, you start noticing opportunities to serve that were always around you but never noticed. A second purpose often looks smaller on the outside but feels larger within the heart. It is not about status or recognition, but about alignment with what truly matters. And this alignment brings peace because it removes the pressure of proving yourself. I have seen people discover their second purpose in the simplest of places like a garden, a classroom, or even a neighborhood bench. What matters is not the size of the action, but the sincerity behind it. And sincerity is what transforms ordinary acts into meaningful contributions. So, the third lesson is that your second purpose is not a downgrade from your first life, but an upgrade in awareness. It may look quieter, but it carries deeper meaning. And in that deeper meaning, you find a kind of joy that is steady and unshakable. It does not depend on applause or achievement, but on presence and contribution. And presence becomes your greatest strength when titles are no longer needed. I once met a retired teacher who said that her happiest years began when she stopped trying to be important and started trying to be useful. That shift from importance to usefulness is where peace begins, and peace is what allows your second purpose to flourish naturally. So do not underestimate the quieter chapter of your life. It may not be loud, but it is deeply meaningful. And meaning is what ultimately sustains the human spirit. So embrace your second purpose not as something lesser, but as something truer. And allow it to unfold gently without pressure or comparison. Because comparison belongs to the first chapter, but contentment belongs to the second. And contentment is what makes simple days feel complete. When you stop measuring life by external success, you begin to measure it by inner peace. And inner peace is the clearest sign that you are aligned with your second purpose. It is not something you chase, but something you allow to emerge. And as it emerges, you realize that life after retirement is not about ending chapters, but writing gentler ones, where success is measured by peace and not pressure, and where every day becomes an opportunity to contribute in small, meaningful ways. That is the quiet beauty of your second purpose. It does not demand more from you, it simply reveals more within you. And what it reveals is enough to fill the empty house of the heart. So walk gently into this chapter with openness and awareness, and with gratitude, and with trust, and with humility, and with love, and with courage, and with patience, and with kindness, and with grace, and with presence. That is enough, more than enough, to begin again, softly, quietly, beautifully. Your second purpose is not a destination, but a gentle unfolding of meaning that was always inside you, waiting for expression through service, compassion, awareness, and love that grows deeper with every small act you offer to the world.